A couple of weeks ago, my daughter Emma came downstairs and declared, "Dad, you should use the last song on the Hamilton soundtrack for a sermon." We've been listening to the soundtrack at least 2 or 3 times a week for almost 2 years, but I couldn't place the song and stared blankly back. She replied to my stare, "You know, who lives, who dies, who tells your story?" She was right, because that is the High Holy Days in a nutshell. And Yizkor. What we have come together for this afternoon is the who tells your story part. We just heard the words of El Malei Rachamim, our plea for God's compassion on the souls of our loved ones who have gone before us. In a few minutes, we'll join together in the words of Mourner's Kaddish. And when we recite those words together, we will thank God for life while never explicitly mentioning death, though we'll for certain be thinking about those who have died and whom we miss so dearly. We, the living, we stand here in order to recall their stories. That is what Yiscor is. It literally means He will remember. Those who touched us in life, and perhaps those of generations past who we never even met. We say these words in order to tell their stories. A couple of years ago, I heard a talk by Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz, and he described what he felt are the 5 different deaths that each person experiences when they leave this world. I'm not certain I agree with his generalization of 1, 2, and 3, because each person has a different journey. The first death on his list is when a person has accepted that their life is coming to an end, either because of age or illness. The second is the moment of medical death, when someone is pronounced deceased. And the third death he describes is when a casket is lowered into a grave and the loved ones go through the rituals of grieving. I think these are generalizations that might not parallel each person's journey. But I was really struck by his 4th and his 5th. The 4th death, as Rabbi Yanklowitz described it, is the last time that someone's name is uttered. Think about that for a moment. How many of your great-grandparents can you recall by name? How about great-great-grandparents? Those that can are often surprised by how many cannot. Typically, there is at least one family historian in every generation. Some time ago, I spent a couple of years working on my family's genealogy. I've mostly reached dead ends that will take travel or much more committed time than I have to reach farther back into history. But in the process, I recovered the name of one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, my grandfather's great-grandfather. Before I found his name on a tax record from the 18th century, when had his name last been uttered? On a trip to Chicago, I found the graves of 3 others whose shoulders I stand on, a great-grandfather and 2 great-great-grandparents. I stood at their graves, people I've never met, and I said Kaddish, and I wondered, really not certain, when was the last time someone had said Kaddish for them? Are their names ever said? Suddenly the notion that there will come a time when my name is last uttered becomes more real. Life is fleeting. Who will live and who will die and who will tell my story? The 5th death is when the last of your influence fades from the world. We all like to think we have an impact. Some create businesses or legal practices or clinics. Others teach or cook or clean or build. We all spend our days in some way doing something. And whether we realize it at the moment or not, what we do has an effect on the world. It is ennobling to think that our lives, both in the mundane moments and the holy ones, have an impact. We often don't even know how. But equally as humbling, or more so, perhaps devastating, is to think that no matter what we do, no matter how hard we work, there may come a point in the future, there will come a point in the future when our influence will cease. That is what Yizkor is. To remember, to be commanded to remember. Yankelowitz's list of 5 deaths mirror what is commonly said from this bima, that our eternality is in and through the ones who we leave behind. It is through us, the living, that our loved ones live on as we utter their names and celebrate their influence. We who live, we are the ones who tell their stories. 4 times a year, our tradition calls upon us to remember. Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot, and Yom Kippur. Many of you felt called here today to remember those whom you miss so much because their lives touched yours and they had influence on you. We all emanate forth from the source of life. Life passed from one generation to the next. But we don't have the names of those who created that chain. At least not all of them. That is what the Kaddish is. The Kaddish gives us words to use so that we can give thanks. We know the names Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. But then there are dozens of generations few of us can give names to. When we say Kaddish, we give thanks for the wonder of life that has been passed through all of the others that came before us. And so in this way, referring back to Yankelowitz's 5 deaths, their influence hasn't ceased. They passed a spark of life on to the next generation, and the next, and the next, and the next, and so on. And now we each tend that spark. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? We can't be certain who will tell our stories, or if anyone even will. But we can tell the stories of those that came before us. We are commanded to. And so as we take their memories into our hearts, as we celebrate the chain of life and our place in it, let us also consider that 4 times a year we are called upon to remember, we're called upon to come together, to cry, to smile, to remember something that they taught us or gave us, and to utter their names, whether we know them or whether we do not. May their memories be for a blessing for us and through us.